The party was in full swing. It was the 5th birthday of little Oliver, the family's only child. His parents, Helga and Jonas, arrived in our town when the boy was several weeks old and immediately hired me as a nanny. I was always with him, both in moments of happiness and sadness. And now, too, after his dad died suddenly, I was with him. That birthday was going to be special. For the first time, the family gathered guests under their roof. They were their relatives who came from afar to finally meet the boy. We laid the table in the backyard. Helga served wine and snacks. Only Jonas wasn't there. He felt sick. He had a fever, nausea, and a headache all day long. It wasn't strange, though. The previous day, Jonas had well too much whiskey. Right before the guests arrived, his father and stepmother, Mr. and Mrs. Cooper, and his stepsister, Dorothy, who was 10 years younger than him. Helga had insisted on the family meeting. Jonas was against it categorically. He always did the best he could to avoid communication with his relatives. I never understood the reason, but this time, under his wife's pressure, Jonas gave up. So he highly exaggerated his sickness, only not to see his family. Oliver's father isolated himself in his study. Dorothy wanted to check on him, but Helga stopped her with the ice-cold no. She snapped it sharply, claiming Jonas needed rest. I looked after Oliver. But the moment I went to the restroom, the boy secretly sneaked in to see his dad. I saw balloons flowing out of the study's open door and understood that the little troublemaker was there. Jonas was lying on the couch, and his face was motionless, like that of a wax figure. The boy was standing next to the couch, looking at him and sobbing quietly, pressing his hands to his chest. The blanket that covered his father slipped down, revealing his bluish hand that looked like a thick log. The boy wept loudly and threw himself into my arms. Another door opened in the depths of the study. It led to Oliver's parents' bedroom. Helga emerged from the doorway. She was pale, but not a single muscle moved on her face. She only waved her hand, ordering me to take the child away. Walking, I heard her call the emergency service and give precise answers in a restrained manner. Composure was Helga's primary feature. The doctors came quickly and confirmed that Jonas had died. While they were carrying the body to the ambulance, we heard a female scream. It was Helga. Everyone rushed to her in Jonas's bedroom. She curled up on the bed, pulling her knees to her chin. For the first time ever, I saw her so vulnerable. She was holding her bloodied hand to her chest. Next to the bed was a huge snake coiled on the floor. It raised its head and was staring at Helga. Its tail was trembling. We heard the threatening rattle. I couldn't believe my eyes. Snakes never crawled into houses in our area, especially in town. The medics didn't dare to approach the bed. Suddenly, Mr. Cooper squeezed himself into the room and threw a blanket over the snake. It went quiet. After that, he carefully took the blanket with the snake, took it to Jonas's study, and closed the door. Mrs. Cooper explained to the medics that it was a very dangerous rattlesnake, so Helga needed an antidote urgently. She was taken to the hospital. The animal control service arrived to take the snake. A depressive silence descended on the house. Oliver finally fell asleep. The doctors allowed to give him a light tranquilizer. Poor boy. First, his father died suddenly, and then the snake bit Helga. It's so much stress for the child, and all of this on his birthday, which he had been looking forward to so much. Helga was always somehow distant from her son. Jonas adored the kid, but he rarely spent time at home. In the past year, he drank heavily and came back late. The spouses had scandals more often, mainly because of money, or more precisely because of the lack of it. This was the reason Helga insisted on meeting with Jonas's parents. She hoped they'd help them repay the banking loans. Or else, the family would lose their house. Only one thing worried me. How come Jonas's parents knew so much about snakes? And the fact that it appeared in the house on the day they came was very suspicious. I phoned the hospital and they told me that Helga was given the antidote and that her condition was stable. Regarding Jonas's death, the cause was the same: snake venom. The doctors found the bite marks on his skin. However, they suspected a much greater dose of the venom had entered his blood. All we could do was to wait for the examination results. I knocked on Dorothy's room door. She was crying. I told her I was sorry and cautiously changed the topic to snakes. It turned out that her parents owned a snake farm where they extracted venom for pharmaceutical companies. Dorothy had grown up among snakes and knew a great deal about them. So I assumed that Jonas knew about them too, but I was wrong. He'd always been panicked by them. And he'd always been mad when his parents held up brave Dorothy as an example. I found information about the Cooper's farm online and dialed the number from the information section. I said I was from the police and asked if they had rattlesnakes and how many. A hesitant groan emanated from the receiver. Dragging the words, the female voice told me that there had been 5 of them until recently. But the other day, one snake disappeared. That is, it escaped. Experienced specialists were sent to find it. Could it be a coincidence? It could. But it was too weird, wasn't it? Especially considering that the same kind of snake suddenly appeared in our house. I went to check on Oliver. The boy was sleeping tightly, sighing occasionally. Then I hurried to his parents' bedroom, hoping to find a thing that Helga held dear to her. A notebook with golden lettering. She wrote something in it every evening. Probably it was her diary. Helga attended a therapist and, on his recommendation, noted down her emotional experiences. Though what emotions could such a cold-blooded creature experience? Surprisingly, the notebook was lying in the most obvious place, next to the bed. I took it and came back to Oliver's room. Helga left the first note a year ago while Oliver had a nasty illness and was admitted to the hospital. I remembered that episode clearly. Expensive treatment and daily checkups. It was then that the family stopped repaying the loans and spent all their savings on the boy. Helga begged Jonas to take the money from his parents, claiming Oliver was their only grandson. More so, he's their only grandson from their favorite daughter, she wrote. What? I read the sentence again. Helga stated that Oliver was Dorothy's son, and she complained about why she and Jonas had to bear costs on somebody else's child. But Jonas was adamant and refused to take money from his family. That's when Oliver yelled in his sleep. He woke up and put his head on my lap. I patted his ginger hair, thinking of Dorothy's long strands of the same shade. The boy confessed he had a dream about a snake. Of course, I said. You saw it for the first time, so you got scared. It wasn't the first time, but the second, Oliver corrected me. It turned out he'd first seen the snake the other day. His grandma showed it to him. The word stuck in my throat. A few minutes later, we were in the Cooper's room. I demanded that they explain how they could bring the snake here and even boast about it to the child. Mrs. Cooper herself looked like a snake at that moment. She didn't even blink. Through the clenched teeth, she hissed that the specimen she'd shown the boy was absolutely safe. And then she produced a vodka bottle that she'd brought as a present for Jonas. There was a real snake inside, preserved in alcohol though. Jonas, who had been terribly afraid of snakes since he was a little boy, would have probably had a heart attack if he'd seen such a present. Sure, if his heart hadn't stopped earlier. Sick people, I thought, and then asked them about the rattlesnake that went missing from the farm. The Coopers exchanged glances. They were apparently aware of it. Jonas's father shook his head and assured me he would never harm his family. But what could come between them and Jonas? Why hadn't they spoken for so long? However, Mr. Cooper clenched his jaw and didn't say a word. I returned to Dorothy's. I put on cartoons for Oliver and put headphones on his head. Then I sat in front of the girl and told her I knew she was the boy's mother. Dorothy gave Oliver a tender look and confessed that she had given birth to him when she was 15. too early to be a mother. Mrs. Cooper didn't support her daughter and insisted the boy had to be adopted. Jonas saved him. He had recently married and convinced Helga to adopt his nephew. She agreed, especially considering the boy's father was her brother, Niels, who worked for Cooper's back then. He was a handsome, strong, blue-eyed young man. He was Dorothy's first love. They had dated and even kissed secretly, but Dorothy didn't let him do more. But one day, Jonas and Helga came by, and the four of them had a party and got drunk. Dorothy remembered almost nothing from that night, except that Niels took her by force. It was cold and dark, quick and brutal. When she came to, her father was swathing her in a blanket, promising to throw the bastard in prison. But she asked him not to do it, as she loved Niels. Her father only moaned. The next day, the young man was fired. Dorothy had feared that Oliver would be like him, but it didn't happen. To prove it, she showed Niels' account on Instagram. When I saw the picture, my mouth got dry. I had seen him, the young man with a dragon tattoo all over his arm. It was before the guests arrived. Oliver and I came back from the walk earlier because I'd left my wallet home. The man delivered Helga a box that looked like a gift box. I remember she wasn't happy that we came back earlier. Back then, I thought Helga feared it would ruin a surprise for Oliver. So, was the snake in the box? Theoretically, Niels could steal it. He knew the farm and had friends among the workers, so he could know when the owners were absent. But why would Helga need a venomous snake? I returned to her diary and the events of the previous year. Jonas's confidence irritated Helga, and together with his too soft attitude towards the boy, it aroused suspicions in her. Helga had a DNA test done, and it showed that Niels wasn't Oliver's father. But Jonas, did Mr. Cooper know about it? Had it happened on that terrible night? Had he concealed this fact to blame Niels? So this is why the father and the son avoided each other, because of this shameful secret. What if Helga told the other members of the family that Jonas was the father? What if Dorothy then knew her stepbrother had raped her? Could she kill him? And what about Mrs. Cooper? Could she take revenge for her daughter? I rushed to Jonas's study. The dose of the venom in his blood was too high, so it could enter his body differently. I searched everywhere but found nothing. Suddenly I spotted something white between the back and the cushion of the couch. It was a syringe cap. The murderer could inject the venom when Jonas was drunk, and the alcohol only aided quick poisoning. The snake could only be the finishing stroke to cover up the injection mark. But what about the snake's attack on Helga? Was it an accident? I didn't waste time on guessing and called the police. Together, we searched the entire house. We found a secret niche in the wall of Helga and Jonas's bedroom. It contained the box Niels had brought and a cage with several mice, probably to feed the snake. Helga's fingerprints were found on the syringe cap. The syringe itself took the longest to find, but it was eventually found by accident in the sewer. It had traces of the venom on its inner sides. Helga wanted revenge. Jonas had cheated on her with his stepsister. Because of him, she fell out with her brother, and he made her care for his and Dorothy's son. She hated her husband and wanted him to die from his biggest phobia, a snake, and she wanted the suspicion to fall upon his family. His stepsister, who was his lover, his father, who had slandered the innocent Niels, and his stepmother, who had wanted to rid herself of her grandson so much. I felt dizzy. The story was shocking. I'd never seen living snakes in my life, but it turned out I had lived among them all this time, in the real nest of the snakes. I couldn't help thinking about what would happen to Oliver. Would Dorothy be a good mother? Could she protect him from the snakes he would meet in his life?